on Zoom. Marvelous, marvelous, good. Right, hello again, welcome. Thank you for joining me. I'm on a scruffy, lazy, going for a run sort of vibe today because we're having a week of Calm at Articulate. And today I'm going to be talking about how you can bring some brand personality, even for companies, brands that maybe appear at first glance to be a touch on the boring side, but not really. So without any further ado, I have a presentation that I would like to share with you, and I've got some things I want to talk about. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Right, advanced. No, that's not right. Let's share that. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing my my Chrome browser with how to talk about technical subjects and still have a brand personality. So yeah, this is as a B2B technology marketing agency. This is kind of our bread and butter. This is our wheelhouse, and I think the biggest problem that we face. The biggest problem is what I call the smooth pebble. Okay, and the smooth pebble is one that nobody can object to, a message, a website page, a piece of copy. The problem with the smooth pebble is if everybody is happy with it and you've sort of polished it and smoothed it down and removed anything that might raise an eyebrow or cause a offense, or not even offense, cause a little bit of surprise, you've got something very, very dull and boring, and unnecessarily dull and boring. And there are lots and lots of reasons why it happens, and I will talk about why psychologically I think this happens, but I'm going to give you some examples of how the smoothing process manifests itself in conversation, and therefore you can detect it and resist it. So how do we get those? Here is what we hear, right? We want it to sound professional. The word professional, when given in feedback to us, is like the worst feedback we can get. What does professional mean? Expertise isn't boring, right? You don't have to write like a PhD thesis or an article in the Lancet to be professional, to convey your expertise, your insight. And in fact, if you try to sound big and clever by using complicated sentences, long words, depersonalizing it, lots of passive voice, lots of dull imagery, or you smooth the pebble. In pursuit of something that you think sounds professional, you actually end up being quite alienating. So I think expertise is incredibly exciting. One of the things that has sustained me in a 20-year career as a writer is talking to people who really know what they're talking about, and going from a position of relative ignorance, in some cases absolute and dismal ignorance, to a little bit of knowledge by interacting with them, I think is a delightful thing. I think that's kind of the purpose of Articulate, actually, but don't tell anyone, we're in marketing, really. The second problem is what I call the man in the mirror problem, and it's often a man. We're on a sort of train of thought to turn this into the person in the mirror problem, and then suddenly it becomes a little bit less of a swinging sentence. But this manifests itself in two ways. The first way is assuming that the person you are communicating to, marketing to, writing for, building a website for, is like you, in the sense that they have the same motivations, the same interests, the same experience, the same background, and they want to hear your version of events, right? And I've talked in other webinars about how most people are spending most of their time not thinking about your business at all. I mean, like almost all of their time not thinking about your business. So if you talk about your stuff in your language, you're actually running the risk of alienating people. Now, when we write websites, and particularly website copy, but also blog copy, and it doesn't ring true for the techie, we call them technical terrorists inside our clients, the sort of the IT experts and the specialists and the developers and the product managers, And they object to it because it's not something they would like to read or something that is interesting or novel for them. They are forgetting the fact that the people who are actually supposed to be reading it are not technical like them, who do not have the same experience, do not have the same interests. And in fact, if you wrote something that worked for the technical terrorist, you'd alienate the potential buyer in most cases. The second thing, and I think this is actually a growing thing that we're growing in awareness of, is to make some assumptions about who that person is. And a really trivial glib example is we wrote a blog post in which we told the story of a CIO. And in fact, I was thinking of the CIO at a well-known consumer brand, somebody I interviewed once. And we used the word she. We made this unnamed person in this story, in this article, a woman. And the feedback came back from the client, is this a typo? And the assumption that all CIOs are men is an easy one to make, and demographically the majority, but not all women CIOs are men, and there's all kinds of reasons and politics and history behind that. But the assumption that they're all men is dangerous, alienating, risky. So there's a sort of the, people who are reading this want to read, they want to read the same stuff I want to read about. And then the people who are reading this are like me. And I think both of those are risks. Not technical enough is a variant of the man in the mirror problem. What typically this feedback comes from is when we're writing top of funnel business outcome focused or SEO focused content, and people, usually the technical terrorists, yearn for nerdy details and subject matter expertise and knowledge, and they would be gratified and excited and motivated by seeing bits of source code and instructions about what to type into PowerShell to get the thing to happen. And that's not what we're writing. Not technical enough is usually what they mean that's what they want when they say not technical enough. And I have this view that Articulate is working for, we're being paid by our client, but we're writing for their customer, right? What do they know? What do they understand? So if you've got good personas and clear understanding of the issues that those people are facing, it's easier to write that stuff and it's easier to justify why you're doing it. And I remember an interview that I did years ago with Franklin Chang Diaz, who is probably the most genius person I've ever spoken to. Although I did meet Sergey Brin once, who's probably also a bit geniuses. I see the question and I'll come to it. Thank you for that. And I like the question. So I'll come to that in a second. So Franklin Chang Diaz was an astronaut. He had been to space 4 or 5 times, I forget. And at the time he held the record for the longest time in duration in space of any American. And when I was interviewing him, he was running a company that made ion rocket engines. So he was an astronaut, pilot, rocket scientist, business entrepreneur, CEO, right? I mean, like properly high-level genius. And he spent an hour and a half explaining to me and my then colleague and soon to be colleague again, hello Claire, how orbital mechanics work and why sometimes it takes longer to go to Mars than other times, depending on where the planets are in their orbits around the sun. And he explained this over the phone. It's a complex thing. He was explaining why ion engines are good and all of this stuff. He found the exact right pitch to talk to 2 non-rocket scientists and explain the point. What I'm getting at here is you can calibrate the messaging. And if you are genuinely a subject matter expert, you can calibrate that message for somebody who is not. The ability to explain something complicated, I think, is the mark of intelligence. Communication, connecting is kind of the thing we have to do as human beings and as marketers. And so Lucy asks, what if you write for scientists who also have the technical terrorists in themselves? Yes, there is there is, and I suspect, Lucy, maybe if you're coming from a company like Chemaxon, or who's got very, very technically demanding audience, clearly you need to be talking about their issues in their language. And there are some audiences, I've no doubt, when Dr. Chang Diaz writes a proposal to NASA for budget funding or something like that, or a design document, he's writing properly technical material. That's product support. It might be appropriate for technical literature. It might be appropriate for product literature. I think for marketing, you still need to find this way of just calibrating that message and understanding the audience. And even with a scientist, even with technical terrorists of any kind, use that phrase jokingly, we love them. I mean, I'm a bit of a nerd myself, so I'm sometimes the technical terrorist here. Even when writing for them, if you can imaginatively put yourself in their shoes and understand their issues and talk about their problems and needs in their language, whatever's appropriate, and you can do it clearly, succinctly, and you've communicated it well, I think you're doing a good job. So there is clearly a graduated thing, but it doesn't mean if you're writing for scientists, you have to write in the language of a PhD thesis. That would be the wrong mechanism, the wrong delivery of it. And I think we all know the difference between good writing, even on technical subjects, and very academic writing, for example. Okay, so let's move on. Thank you for the question. I like it when people ask me questions. Another bit of feedback we often get, and we have a tendency to write, sexy headlines, right? Because we're trying to get people's attention. We're trying to earn people's eyeballs and time. So we write these rather, what clients sometimes think of as glib and jokey headlines, or we're using metaphors or telling stories, using some arresting language. And clients don't always like it because it doesn't sound serious. We're a very serious company. We do very serious things. It's very important what we do. Yeah, but if you actually think about the people who are reading it, they're reading every day. Typically in our world, they might be reading Wired or The Register, or they might be reading a quality newspaper. They might be looking at The Economist. They might be listening to intelligent, clever podcasts. They're used to digesting information in this format. And if you are sort of starchy and stiff and uncommunicative over here, it's going to jar for the audience. And you're not sounding big and clever, you're just sounding starchy and sort of square. So one of the things, I've had this a couple of times in my career as a writer, we really like The Economist. We think that's very grown up, professional and serious. Can you make our copy sound like the Economist? If you actually read The Economist, they do some other things very well too, editing and using facts and telling stories and blah, 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 blah. But the headlines are quite light, they're witty, they're sharp, they make you think, they're arresting. And I think that people say they want to have stuff like The Economist, but don't know how The Economist achieves the effect it achieves. And it's a very deliberate process. Okay, so why does this happen? I think laziness, it's quite hard to write well. It's quite hard to think this stuff through. It's easier to just go, sometimes we just go, all right, whatever the client wants, we'll do that because it's easier to get it approved and do something. And hopefully we educate the client over time about what they need to do. My neighbor has suddenly decided to start hammering. I'm really sorry about that. If it's coming through the noise cancelling, it's not. It's just my neighbor doing building work. Sometimes, I think most often, clients don't know that there is an alternative. They don't know that there's a better way of doing it. They should watch this webinar. There's certainly a lot of incompetence out there, a lot of bad writing, a lot of marketing agencies who aren't pushing their clients in this direction. Groupthink and hippo, I think, happens a lot. So when I talk about technical terrorists, this is a very common mode of failure for us. So we write something top of funnel, SEO focused, business outcomes focused. We send it to our client who is a marketing manager in a company, and they go, great, we like that. And then they forward it to a product manager or a technical person or somebody. Can you just check this for me? And the person reviewing it is not thinking about marketing, wasn't involved in discussions, doesn't understand SEO, doesn't understand the marketing funnel, top, middle, and bottom of funnel, doesn't understand any of that, looks at it and goes, this isn't technical enough, right? And then starts getting sort of stressed out about that. And we sometimes get these sort of very ranty feedbacks from, not from our contact, but from the contact they forwarded it to out of context. Or, and this is also happening a lot in smaller companies where we're dealing with owner managers, you get the highest paid person's opinion, right? So I don't like it, right? We have to rewrite it then. And, you know, it's an interesting observation that when we start a relationship with client, and I went through the notes of 20 onboardings to check this, one of the things that comes up most often when we ask what a good relationship looks like with an agency, they say, you're the experts in marketing. You've got to tell us what we need to do. We trust you. That's why we hired you. And then within weeks, they're going, no, we don't like that. We don't think we should do that. We need to do this. And negotiating that, diplomatically pushing back on that is challenging. So the hippo problem. And lastly, I think this fear of standing out, fear of being the tall poppy, especially in a kind of groupthink scenario where, you know, 3 or 4 people are on the fence for it, and then, you know, one of the technical terrorists goes, I don't like it, it's not technical, or the CEO goes, I don't, you know, I think it's too glib, and everyone goes, oh yeah, yes. This kind of groupthink, fear-based. We want to look like all the other companies that are like us, when in fact you want to look like none of those other companies. And this comes from having a weak core. It comes from having not a clear vision of what the company is, why it exists, not having clear personas, not having clear messaging, not having clear positioning, you know, not having a clear value proposition. And that stuff is bloody hard. But a lot of companies have got to a certain stage in their growth, and they have a sort of incumbency, and what got them to that point is at odds with the stuff they need to do to get to the next level of growth. But that's another conversation for another day. So let's talk about some examples of motivational examples of what good might look like. Apple is, I think, the best possible example, the best possible advert for doing good marketing, standing out, being different. You can come across. I think most of our clients, if not all of them, would have deep respect for Apple's positioning, Apple's marketing. You cannot argue with their market cap and their growth rate. You know, they're extraordinarily successful. Something's going on here. And yet, think about it for a second. The experience of using a Mac, and I'm here using a Mac now. I've got a Mac laptop. I've got an iPhone. I'm like the biggest Apple fanboy. I've got my old Mac Plus there, right? I am seriously a proper Mac fanboy. But the experience of using a laptop or using an iPhone is, except on the very margins, like a slightly better camera, slightly more responsive, slightly different software, exactly the same as if I'm using a Lenovo or an HP laptop, or if I'm using a Samsung phone. It's basically the same thing, right? Highly commoditized, and yet also deeply technical. So what's the difference? I mean, there are some technical differences, some fact, truth points around Apple, but fundamentally it's marketing. And this famous repositioning, pivoting ad campaign in the 90s, Think Different, after Steve Jobs came back, there are no products in these pictures. I remember being in San Francisco when these were up on billboards and thinking, wowzers, you know, this is really, really impressive, really differentiating. This is having brand personality for basically a commoditized technical product. And at the time, even more so, I would argue. No iPhone in those days. I found this little video. I used to show this a lot to people, and I think it shows how you go from that Apple positioning to kind of a noisier, more rounded Pebble and get a worse result. So this is just going to last a couple of minutes. In fact, I probably won't play the whole thing, but I would urge you to watch this. So what I think is really fun about this is they took the old iPad box, and you know, it's just very simple. It shows you the product, and then there's this sort of emotional pictures on here. I think Janis Joplin, right? And then, you know, Microsoft, in the imagination of the video, Microsoft gets to work with it, put more words on it. We need something expressively human. And instead of having Janis Joplin singing, you've got somebody doing this. Anyway, it goes on and on and on. And suddenly you turn something that's pure and simple and elegant into something that's very noisy and messy. I'll leave you to watch that on another occasion. It's embedded in the video, in the presentation. But I think you can see the progression there, and the two sides of that. So here is a way that you can begin to bring a bit of personality. You can put a personality into it, a character. And I loved the grumpy old guy who I think bears more than a passing resemblance to Scott Galloway on the old Answer the Public website. It just character. Now replaced by a robot, but a robot that also has some personality. And I'm a big fan of robot personalities. We have Artie, the articulate robot, on our website. So I love that. So you can find ways of bringing character, literally character, into your marketing without changing the product or the service or what you do. You can have a little bit of chutzpah, a little bit of sex appeal, a little bit of cheek, a little bit of wit. Virgin Atlantic, which I often cite, and it's I think visible to a lot of people, so people will understand what I'm getting at. Airplanes are really deeply technical. They cost hundreds of millions of pounds. It takes a year for a pilot to get qualified. It takes, it's a really difficult thing to fly them there. You put your life in in their hands, and functionally, all airlines are the same. You get onto a metal tube made by Airbus and Boeing, and you go from one airport to another airport. And indeed, from the pilot's perspective, I wasn't an airline pilot, but I used to be a pilot, flew a lot. From the functional perspective, all planes basically work the same way, right? Air traffic is the same in Germany and the UK. There's no Virgin air traffic. There's no Virgin aeroplanes. It's highly commoditized. So, to come up with a brand that's based on personality against a very technical, safety conscious, commoditized, price sensitive business, I think is a really good example of how you can actually add that onto almost anything. I think here's another way you can bring some personality to it. If you can see some common trends in your competitors, everyone's zigging over here, right? Every single MSP website in the UK is almost identical to every other one. And what we tried to do with HTG, our award-winning website for them, is switch the perspective. It's about people. So it's a people-first technology partner. It's not an MSP. And we've got pictures of people. And yeah, it's stock photography and it's positioning. So it wasn't done on a huge budget, but it looks different and it tells a different story. And I think that's really important. Maddie came up with this phrase, who we are, not what we do. And I picked up on it when I was preparing for this. I thought this is very powerful. Another way of adding differentiation, of telling a story, of being adding a bit more personality is, you might be doing something quite technical, but you can talk about how you do it or about the company, the zeitgeist of the business. So at Articulate, we are very proud of our culture. We have a chief happiness officer. There she is, Liz. We are investors and people certified. We're a B Corp. We do various things. And talking about that, not necessarily, there's a little bit of that on our website, but for example, in our sales communications and stuff, as a way of saying, there are lots of marketing agencies, but this is us. This is what we do. This is why we're different, is really powerful because it gives some reasons to believe. Similarly, People and Planet, we're very committed. We want to be very progressive as a business. And I think talking about that and aligning, our values with our clients' values. And we've had companies come to us specifically because of this. They had a choice of agencies and they wanted an agency that had, could do all the work, tick, 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 but also aligned on values. And I think this is quite important. If being a B Corp doesn't appeal to you, but you want a marketing agency, it doesn't matter. We're still here. We still do all the stuff. But if you do want a B Corp, I think we're one or two in the world marketing agencies at a B Corp. There are more coming. I know there are more coming, which is great. So how to demonstrate technical expertise without being boring. Simplify and focus, right? So cut out the detail, narrow down the focus, have fewer messages that you make more clearly. Be a hedgehog, not a fox. A hedgehog knows one big thing and a fox knows many small things. That's where that phrase comes from. And it's really good evidence of a company that hasn't got its thinking straight, is kind of trying to tell multiple stories to multiple people, that they have a carousel on their homepage, meaning you go to the homepage and there are 5 different slides that come across, right? That shows, if I see that, I think it's a failure mode. I think they haven't really got their message clear. It's a really big telltale. I also love this quote from Kelly Johnson, who was an airplane designer. Simplicate and add lightness, and sort of turning those adjectives into instructions. Simplicate and add lightness. I think this is really a thing that Apple does exceptionally well. And here is HPE's homepage, our former client. We worked for them a long time, still work for HPE. And they, I never cease to go on about this, but their homepage is a carousel with 6 carousels. What are you going to do? You're going to sit there and watch 6 slides waiting for the one that you want? And of course not. The odds are you're going to see 1 or 2, and the one that you actually want has suddenly disappeared by the time you go to click on it. Now you're looking at something else you don't want. This side-to-side scrolling is bad. Everyone knows how to do this, right? Up and down is easy. Left to right is hard. Carousels, muddled thinking. And Apple goes up and down. HP goes side to side. Apple is worth, trillions of dollars. HP isn't. Go figure, right? I think it's all in the homepage design, actually. So next thing you can do to communicate better is around writing. And I would say this, I'm a writer by profession. I've been a professional writer for more than 20 years, and I think it's really important. So writing well is an art, a skill. It's hard. It comprises research, writing, editing. It's not just copywriting. It's not just wordsmithing, right? There's more to it than just pretty sentences. But done right, as it is on Apple's website, for example, it can be incredibly powerful. So good writing, investing in good writing is really important. Investing in good design, really important, right? Chemaxon, client of ours, they have this unbelievably clever software for unbelievably clever people, right? PhDs use this to do, I don't know, chemical research and things. It's even though I write stuff for them, it's hard to get your head around at a deep technical understanding level. And so, they have to communicate this. But what they do, which I deeply admire, is they have a huge amount of ambition around the design. They are willing to push that as far as they can, this most advanced yet acceptable Mayer principle. And I think that's the design aesthetic that they've come up with, and that we're helping with the PDFs and things. I really like that. So copywriting, you can write about something that's complex and technical and do it well. Design, you can display, communicate, package complicated information in a way that communicates well without diluting or distorting the underlying content. As we get towards McGuffins, this is my word of the month, you start, I won't say distort, but you start to sort of package and represent information in a slightly different way. So I was looking for examples of businesses that are big and complex, and I'm not a huge fan of Goldman Sachs for lots of reasons, but I liked this, carbonomics. So they've kind of taken a thing that CO2 emissions and COP26 and things, and they're sort of trying to put their spin on it, and they've come up with a word, whether this was their word or not, I don't know, to explore, express, package that thought. And that is an example of a MacGuffin. It's a simplification and a communication, and it's a way of making a complex topic belong to you, or staking your claim in that area of knowledge. Thought leadership is much harder than MacGuffins, right? You actually have to do some work. You have to have some ideas. You have to be in advance of the herd. But if you can do thought leadership, as McKinsey does par excellence, you can differentiate. Even if over here you're talking about some technical product, issue, thing, need that you make, and over here you're talking about the world in which it exists, or the needs of the customer, or the problems they face, or that can be incredibly powerful. We had a client years ago who did software testing consultancy, and they published every year a report of the state of software testing, right? And they surveyed people, and it was uniquely influential and important for people in that sector. So they gathered this information. They had genuine thought leadership, genuine insight. It was a really valuable report, and they got a lot of downloads from that, and it was very powerful for that. So, it's not difficult even for small companies to find some way of demonstrating thought leadership. I've got a few more slides, and I'm overrunning slightly, so apologies for that. I guess I'm getting carried away with my subject. So I really liked this idea of people moving from being -1, 0, +1. And it was another astronaut, Chris Hadfield, who came up with this description of people -1, 0, +1. And I was trying to think about using that model for, talking about technical subjects in an interesting, engaging way. So, eliminate any situation where it's hard to read, heavy about with jargon, all about you, badly designed, right? That's not a great place to be. Without changing anything, you can make these improvements relatively easy. So you get to 0. So now you've got well-written material. It's relevant, useful, and interesting to the potential reader, potential customer. It's designed at least adequately. It's nicely packaged, modern standards, and it's scroll up and down. There's no carousel, for example. I also put in here well-sourced. So this is one of the things that we try and train up our writers in internally at Articulate. You increase credibility with data, evidence, facts. So relevant quotes, statistics, facts, sources of information that are valuable, validated, objective third-party sources. So we quite often quote The Economist and McKinsey Global Institute and people like that because they're reputable, they've done quite a lot of work, but that brings some factuality, some truthiness, which is not a particularly attractive word, but some truthiness to copy. And it's the opposite of what my old editor, Matthew Rock, used to call pious throat clearing. So if you read the opening paragraph of an article and it doesn't really contain any facts, but in 2021, it's more important than ever that people are moving to the cloud because the cloud gives you this and that and the other, is an example of pious throat clearing. If you can go, in 2021, X% of companies like the one you're writing for have moved to the cloud, and in 2022, this is expected to accelerate, according to, somebody, McKinsey, you've got something that's much more credible. So well-sourced is really important for credibility. And then +1, this is where you can aim for. This is nirvana. This is a journey. This is the direction of travel. This is a place where you have a distinctive tone of voice, not yada, yada, me too, blah, blah, but it sounds like you, and it sounds like you consistently across all your touch points. You have a coherent visual identity, a robot appears on most of your pages or something. There's some design that looks like you. And, Apple's website, Apple's design aesthetic, it looks like Apple. Apple's copy sounds like Apple. You can read an Apple paragraph, spot it, right? I think of brand personality, the Answer the Public grumpy old man, Articulate's arty robot, that sort of character can be really powerful, even if it's your CEO, right? If it's some company spokesman. Richard Branson is a brand personality for Virgin. It's his presence, his personality, his flamboyance, attention seeking is valuable for Virgin. And all of this supported by tangible reasons to believe. So there's evidence behind it. If you look at any page on Apple, you'll see the big bold statement, and then you'll see the paragraph that is full of reasons to believe, evidence. So that is how you do it, folks. If you want more help, you want us to roll up our sleeves and do some of this work for you, we would be delighted to talk. If you have any questions about anything I've covered today, you can email me, you can contact us on the website, you can book up a meeting. I'd love to talk about it. This is one of my favorite subjects. But for now, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to stop recording, and if anyone has any questions they want to ask sort of off camera, I'll just stay for a minute and